Thanks so much. Right.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Just welcome to the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 10th of November. Before we get started, I'll just remind members that this meeting is being recorded for the benefit of Thurrock residents so that they can see the discussions that take place here tonight. I'll start then with agenda item number 1, which is apologies for absence. I'm not aware of any apologies. Lucy, have we received any, do you know?
No, I haven't received any.
No. Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 2, the minutes of the previous meeting. Were there any comments from anyone on the minutes? No, I'm not seeing anyone comment. Is everyone happy to agree those minutes?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We'll take that as agreed. We'll move on to item number 3, items of urgent business. I've not been notified of or agreed to any items of urgent business this evening. So we'll go on to declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest that they'd like to raise?
No.
No, thank you. I'm not seeing anyone indicate. So relatively large agenda for this evening, but we'll start with item 5, I think a really interesting item on community forums. I think Natalie is going to introduce the report, but I'm also really pleased to welcome our guests this evening, Kim, Peter and Janet from the Thurrock Association of Forums, to talk a little bit about the relationship between the council and forums, and I guess for us as members to ask some questions about that relationship, how we can continue to strengthen it going forward. So really excited to welcome our guests this evening. So Natalie, if I start with you, and then I'll ask each of Kim, Peter and Janet in turn just to introduce themselves to the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor. I've provided a report to the committee which just sets out a bit of background information about how community forums have evolved in Thurrock, the current coverage and general practice across forums. Forums are very much evolve in relation to the issues and the characteristics of the area they cover, but most generally share the same ways of working, similar constitutions, principles, etc. So that is set out in the paper. I'm very happy to answer any specific questions, but you might want to reserve the time for speaking to the 3 guests that we have with us this evening.
Councillor Garris, you're on mute, sorry.
Oh, thanks, Lucy. I knew it wouldn't be long before we started on that. If I could just ask maybe Kim just to introduce yourself first of all, and I guess be really interested to, as we go through kind of you, Peter and Janet, just to sort of hear any reflections you had generally in terms of community forums in Thurrock, how well they're doing, where they need support, and how the relationship with Thurrock Council is sort of working out.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Right, my name's Kim Tolson. I'm actually the chair of the Horn and the Hill Community Forum, but I'm also the chair of TAF, which obviously everyone knows is the Association of the Thurrock Forums. I've been in the current position of chair of TAF for about 3-4 years now. I took over from Lenny Orpin when he decided that he'd obviously done quite a few years in the role and obviously had to retire, and I was taken on as the interim chair, and then obviously pressure was put on me to take on the actual chair fully. It's something I certainly enjoy, purely from the angle that I regard myself as the sort of the in-between with the residents and the council. I've lived in, I'm not a native to Essex, but I've lived in Essex, pretty much in Horndon for nearly 35 years now. So I'm sort of getting the hang of it now. So at the moment, obviously, we constantly sort of look at ourselves as forum chairs or even TAF to find out, what we can do further for the residents, how we can communicate better with the council. Then obviously, things were going reasonably well, and then obviously we then got hit by the pandemic, and that's obviously not everything sideways and pretty much out the window. But we are working probably not as closely with the council at the moment, because we're obviously working very closely with our residents and whoever else needs our extra help and support, especially the vulnerable. And I'm Janet and I are part and parcel of the Orsett ward, which is made up of Horndon, Orsett and Malvern. And the three of us work very closely together because there's obviously interlapping. And one of my other roles up until before the pandemic was I was trying to reactivate 3 to 4 deactivated forums for whatever reason. They've sort of gone into hibernation, and we're trying to obviously try and get the number back to 20, which was the original number of forums about over 15 years ago. And we're still working on that. So the Greys, there's 2 non-active forums in Grays, which is Grays Central and Grays Riverside. So with the Orchard Forum, we're trying to resurrect them, and we're also trying to make sure that 2 ones that are on the sort of fragile side after the pandemic, we can obviously assist them and keep them going. So we hope that some form or other, that although there might be only about 12 or 13 forums, but with the amalgamation of other forums within the existing ones, we should be covering the 20 original forum areas. So that's what we're working at the moment. So if I can hand over, obviously we've got there may be questions. If I can hand over to Peter, who's obviously the vice chair.
Okay, thank you, Kim. I think with regard to the role of forums, it has evolved over the years since they were first set up in the early noughties. Forums have the ability to act as quasi parish councils. Obviously, they don't have any legal status as such, but they do have the ability to collect their residents' views on various issues that affect the locality that they live in, and convey these to the council via their ward councillors. And to that extent, obviously it is crucial that there is a good working relationship with the ward councillors in the wards that have active forums, and I'm sure this is the case. Certainly in Chadwell St Mary, the forum here enjoys a very good working relationship with our 3 current elected councillors. Where there is sometimes, because if we're talking about how forums interact with the council and so on and so forth, where sometimes there can be, shall we say, difficulties is interacting direct with council officers in specialist directorates. This comment is not, I must emphasise, addressed in any shape or form at Natalie and her team, who over the years have been and still are extremely supportive, well, certainly to this forum, and I'm sure it's fair to say to all forums that are currently active. Having said that, some other officials have certainly, in my experience, shown some reluctance to deal with forums for one reason or another on certain matters. The forums, I think, also have to work with other organisations in Thurrock, and one organisation that we in Chadwell have quite a lot of dealings with is Thurrock CVS, as well as the council. it was the community forum here that actually provided the impetus to set up the community hub that's based in Chadwell Library, and that is obviously, as it were, not exactly ticking over at the moment, but has been going quite well up until lockdown started. With regard to the role of TAF, that again has changed over the years, and in my view, it has improved in that there is now a point through which forums can make representations to the council on such issues, the thorny issue of our annual admin money, to name but one. That wasn't always the case in the dim and distant past, as it did rather seem to be left to individual forums to sort of paddle their own canoes and sort these matters out with the council. However, with the way that TAF has evolved, and particularly in the last couple of years, there is now, I think, more of a tendency to negotiate with the council en bloc, and to ensure that all forums get a reasonable cut of the cake, if that's the right way to put it. And another function that TAF can also perform is to take up certain issues that will affect all forums, regardless of population or anything else in Thurrock. The community infrastructure levy and the implementation and methodology thereof is one, and the dreaded Lower Thames crossing, I would suggest, is another. I think some forums, as Kim has said, have sort of fallen by the wayside. Others sort of seem to come to life when a particular issue arises, and when that sort of disappears off the scene, they also seem to vanish into the sunset temporarily. But I think the community forums do have a vital role to play in representing the views of the people in the wards where they are located, and also in raising funds, not from the council so much, but from other sources, from CVS and from outside sources, for example, the Essex Community Foundation, to fund projects within their wards, and also, as with some money that we raised a year or so back, in other parts of Thurrock too. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter. And Janet, did you want to speak next?
Well, they haven't left me much to say, have they, really? I think they've covered most of it. I will just say, as Kim mentioned, we were doing helping the CVS with supporting vulnerable people. I am finding that I am using more and more email and social media to inform the residents. So we're still very much in touch with our residents in slightly different ways to how we used to be. Natalie's been given tribute for what she does. I would just like to say Lynn Gittings is so hardworking, and nothing's too much trouble for her, and she gives TAF a lot of help. I'm the secretary of TAF, and Lynn always seems to know the answer or know the person to ask, and she has done a really good job. To echo what the others have said, we have a very good relationship with our local councillors. We use them, they use us. We're also members of the CVS, as all forums are. Another benefit that we get is insurance through the council, which is very valuable, which is worth having. I think, to echo again, some directorates, do you call them, in the council, don't seem to realise how much they can use the forums. It's a two-way thing, isn't it? You know, we do have very supportive officers helping us with things, but also sometimes I think they could come to us more to help them and support them in what they're doing. That's it.
Thank you very much to everyone for that really useful kind of introduction and background. And I think just before I open to the wider committee for questions, I think my one question would be, I guess, from a kind of a council's point of view, if there were kind of one or two things that we could do differently to kind of improve or help the work of community forums, what do you think it would be that would really help you to go out there and do more? Kim, I think you were indicating, and then yeah.
I'll step in at this stage, but I'm sure Peter or Janet might have something to say on this as well. That obviously Janet touched on the fact that the council do pay an insurance for all the forums, and obviously Peter's touched on the fact that we have an amount of money. I won't say exactly what it is, but an amount of money for our admin costs. And that's obviously dwindled down from the heady days of when the forums first started, that each particular forum had £10,000, which is obviously a slight difference between what we're receiving now. We could always do with extra funding, but obviously we fully understand, we're realists, that at this time of, or before the pandemic, that obviously money was getting tighter, and you know, we accepted that. And then obviously now the pandemic struck, then obviously, you know, we're thankful that the money hasn't been totally removed. You know, sort out your own insurance, no more admin costs. So hopefully we'll still carry on with that. As Janet said, there's so much that I wasn't going to bring this up, but it's been mentioned already, that there are certain departments within the council that don't use us. I mean, we're here to be used, to be spoken to. We think we're easygoing people. Approach us. You might get an answer that you might not want, but at least we will sort of talk to you and see what we can come up with. So that I wouldn't say there's barriers, because obviously with Natalie and Lynn Gittins, they do an incredible work, and obviously I'm speaking on behalf of all the firms. We'd like to thank you for that, Evan, for that. You know, we can build on, you know, if there is a hurdle, not a barrier, but a hurdle, that we can overcome that in the coming months and years, and hopefully long may forums continue. So Janet or Peter wants to say anything on that, further on that, and obviously now's the time to say something on this particular subject.
Peter, Janet, did you want to come in? I think Peter indicated first, and then maybe Janet.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think following up on what Kim was saying, there is a need for a sort of, shall we say, enhanced working with some council departments. Problems can arise. We were asked over a year ago now to arrange for, I think it was Liz Billingham, to come to a forum meeting to discuss or to talk about Better Care Together Thurrock, which at that time was a fairly new initiative. For one reason or another, that partly because we had speakers already booked, and then he couldn't make it for one other reason, and then obviously lockdown supervened, that never unfortunately took place. But I mean, Whether it ever will, remains to be seen. As far as the money side is concerned, we don't, as I think Kim said, we don't wish to be seen to be taking more than our fair share of, of the council's overall budget. But I think we do need money to cover our insurance and IT as a bare minimum. We in this forum do also have to pay an accountant because we are incorporated as a company limited by guarantee. So therefore we do have to have a legal kind of audit every year for Companies House. But we can accommodate that within our budget. Although it does sometimes mean that I've had to put my hand in my pocket in the past to cover the cost of hiring accommodation for our meetings, but I'm quite happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And then Janet.
I just want to say that we're all, the council and the forums are all working to support the residents of Thurrock to make Thurrock a better place. I've no idea if this is the right place to say this, but I read through all the reports that are going to be presented at your meeting tonight, and I thought it was quite disappointing that although you've had a climate change strategy since 2009, there's never a decarbonisation impact on any of the reports. Now, this probably isn't within your remit, but I know our forum, for one, are taking active steps to try and reduce their carbon footprint. And I just thought you have financial implications, equality implications, all sorts of other things. But I think the most important one's going to be decarbonisation, and that should be overall. As I say, it's not really the answer to your question, but I just thought I'd put it now because I might not get another chance.
Thank you, Jen. I think that's actually a wonderful suggestion, and I think as a council we approved a motion only last year on reaching net zero emissions as a council. I think clearly there's work going on to understand how we get there, but it feels like at the very least we should be considering those emissions when we do work around new policies or strategies and bring those as reports. So look, thank you for that suggestion. I think it's a really good one, and I think officers are listening tonight and we'll consider the best way that we could put that into our reporting going forward. I think it's an excellent idea. I guess as well as that, so I guess on the call tonight we've got Sean, our Director of Finance, and Natalie from a communities perspective. I hope they will have heard the points raised around budgeting issues and around how we make sure that we've got that really strong communication and relationship with local forums, and how we make sure, I guess, Natalie, particularly as we think about the communities framework item sort of next, how we make sure that if we are to have forums as one of the key gateways between the council and the community, that we really kind of emphasise their role and make sure that there's that great communication between the council and forums.
Absolutely. I mean, forums are a fundamental part of our engagement framework. They really do help to reach parts of the community that we wouldn't otherwise reach, and help to articulate issues very much from the resident perspective. So we have to both value and invest in that, not just financially, but also by making sure we do respond to the requests for information and facilitate those conversations when there's an ask of the council to get involved.
Thanks very much. I mean, I think that'll certainly be one element as we kind of continue work on this over the next kind of coming period. It'd be really great to see some of that kind of reflected, and in an extent, I think it already is. But just to be really clear on that as we go forward, I want to open the floor up to councillors now, and I think Councillor Rice, I think you were indicating first of all, and then I'll come back to Councillor Ralph.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say, I mean, you know, Peter is our own forum chair, and he does an excellent job, and the Chadwell Forum works very well. I mean, I think it's very important that we make sure that we give them the annual admin monies, because that's important to keep the forums going. Chadwell Community Forum have been amazing in the battle with the Lower Thames crossing, because it does affect Chadwell, and they've done very well. You know, they've had the people there. They've, you know, and you know they've been able to tell the residents what's happening, and it's that function that is very important, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ralph?
Good evening, all. I just want to ask sort of Kim, what is the average turnout for your meetings at forums? Say the charitable one. Obviously, I attend the Stanford Hope Corinham, Homesteads and Fobbing Corinham one, and on average, on a non-special event evening when we've got nothing particular to discuss, we could get sort of like 10 people there. I visited other forums where there's sort of been 3 or 4 people there. So do you think there is a thing where we need to try and generate more interest in getting people to attend forum meetings? Because perhaps we're not putting, as a forum, not as a councillor, but perhaps we're not being a true representation of the public when we speak as a forum.
Yeah, in answer to that, Councillor Ralph, that as you well know, I do attend Corinham forums, and I've been heavily instrumental in trying to get Stanford Hope Forum back up and running again, because obviously that sort of went off at a bit of a strange tangent, and I also took it upon myself to try and visit most of the forums one way or another, you know, whenever their meetings were held, and obviously I spend quite a bit of time assisting Aveley and Kennington's forum. On the number front, it varies. It can be, you know, 2 to 3 people. It can be 40, 50, 60 people. Obviously, if there's a hot topic, then obviously the residents flood the meetings because obviously it's very important to them. Once it's either resolved to their satisfaction or not, then they obviously disappear again. Hopefully knowing full well the forum's still there to work on their behalf. How we get over that to try and sort of convince the residents within Thurrock, obviously 150,000-ish, that there's between sort of 12 and 14 forums, depending on how you count them, and how they should support them, not necessarily always in physical presence at meetings, but to show that that's something that we as chairs of the forums, TAF, discuss constantly, and we discuss it with the likes of Lynn Gittins. Lynn Gittins tries to attend as many forums meetings as possible. So to give you an instant answer, it can be anything from 2 attendees to 50, 60, 100 attendees, depending on, you know, when the Lower Thames Crossing reared its ugly head, the 3 villages within the Orsett ward, certainly Orsett and Horndon, inundated with people, so much so that the actual meeting at the village hall that I ran 3 of them. The first one, we had people on the pavement trying to get in. So, you know, it really depends on what the current topic is. So hopefully that gives you a sort of an idea, and you know, because you're close to it in Stamford, Stamford and Corinham, which is obviously including Fobbing and Homesteads.
Yeah, thank you, Kim.
Okay.
I've just this thing of trying to come up with ideas of sparking more interest in maybe the younger generation as well to join the forum, because often we talk about subjects that affect them directly, you know, when we talk about the parks and what we want done, and it just seems that it's an opportunity missed, and you know, to get them involved in more of the Christmas events, the more of the summer events that we do. And yeah, it's just working closer ties with the local councillors as well, getting us involved. So before the meetings start, have a little chat with us, because we may have information that is going to come up in a question, and we can give that information beforehand so the chair knows that. But yeah, just continually thinking of new ideas to generate more passion within the community to join the forum and be a part of that wider community. I think it's really essential, because the forums do a good work. You know, you do from benches to all the Christmas fetes and all that, and yeah, it'd be a nice drive to get things back to how they were, say, 10 years ago, especially in Corinham and Stanford, where we had the big Christmas events and things like that. But yeah, I think you do a fantastic work as a group, as a forum. Thank you.
Yeah, just to give you a sort of, you probably know this anyway, but I'm actually the chair of the local primary school PTA, and that particular group is normally supported by young mums. We don't see very many young fathers, but they often say, we want to be more involved in for instance, the PTA or the forum, but unfortunately, due to work, husbands working shifts, they may be working shifts, young children. It's very difficult. We've even considered sort of holding a small creche so that they can bring the children along, put them in the creche, and then we can hold the meeting. So we've tried all sorts. The passion's certainly there, but unfortunately, trying to get young people, because obviously there's certain things in their life that obviously outweigh attending a meeting, for instance, 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock on a Wednesday night. So we're working on it. We constantly will be working on it.
There was an idea that I suggested at our forum that we also streamed it like these meetings, live stream.
Yeah.
And obviously the issue was that some of the subjects that we cover may be sensitive within the community, and it wasn't seen as a good idea. But I thought that'd been a wider way of more being inclusive to the community.
Well, if it's a public meeting, there should be nothing discussed that can't be declared to everyone that's within, the residents within that area. So, I would, for instance, if we went the streaming route for our forum in Horndon, we don't discuss anything that isn't sort of common knowledge. Obviously, if we want to keep it slightly more confidential, then we'll have a committee meeting where not everyone's invited. So, there's ways around that as well.
Thank you, Kim.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks very much. Janet, did you want to come in on that one as well?
Just to say really quickly that the younger age groups don't attend our meetings for the reasons Kim has said. But that doesn't mean to say they're not engaged in forum activities. They most certainly are. And we are still doing all the things. We can't do Christmas this year, but we still do a lot of things that involve the kids. But they will message me, they will email me, they will stop me in the street and ask me about things, and then they'll want feedback from it as well. So just because they're not actually attending a meeting, then it doesn't mean to say they're not engaged in forum at all. And also, it's easier in the smaller communities to get a lot of passion and a lot of people attending at the meetings. I mean, our Baldwin one's the tiniest village in Thurrock, but we would get probably never less than 25 people at our meetings. So again, that's a different aspect of it. If only 2 or 4 came, I'd be very, very disappointed.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. It's just okay, quickly pop back in. I think also when I was saying about the younger generation, I was also meaning sort of the later teenagers to say the 25-year-olds. Obviously, forum meetings are very easy for retired people, and people have time on hands to join in. And obviously, with busy work lives now, meetings are hard to attend. So that is why I was thinking about more the social streaming side of it, of getting information out there and being more accessible for people. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Duffin.
Firstly, thank you to the 3 of you for the work you do, other people on forums and those that engage with the forum in any way to help out. Just sort of the talk of needing more and being able to give more. I don't know if it's something we can recommend, potentially maybe even just a one-off annual meeting each year between sort of Taft or the leadership of Taft with not just the democratic leadership of the council, but also the officer side as well, just to get feedback going both ways, because there's more both sides can do for the other. I don't know if that's something that already happens, but I think even if it's just once a year is something that could be mutually beneficial for both sides.
Thanks, Jack. Kim, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, certainly. It's whenever we have a Taft meeting, not that we have that many per year, we try to sort of keep it just between sort of 4 and 5, with obviously an AGM every 12 months. We do invite certain close contacts within the council, Natalie, for instance, Lynn, and whoever else that can spare the time to attend. I would certainly welcome an opportunity where we could all, get together once a year. Then obviously there's lots of things we could sort of bring to that on both sides, and then obviously we might say something that you're totally unaware of, or vice versa. So yeah, I would definitely go with that, very much so. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and I'd certainly welcome that as well. I think that's a really good suggestion. I think it's worth us taking that forward. And sorry, Kim, do you want to come back in on that again? Oh, sorry, Kim, I think you're on mute there.
No, I've gone click happy.
I'm always doing it myself.
Yeah, I think I'm back on track now.
Did anyone else want to come in on this item? Peter.
I think just sort of following up from that and talking about engaging with the young people, as Councillor Ralph was saying, to a certain extent you can use social media because that seems to be the preferred means of communication for a lot of the younger folks these days. And I'm sure other forums have their own Facebook pages and so on and so forth. Another way of engaging on a slightly more active front is something like we did here, which was actually to get a grant from, partly from Thurrock CVS, partly from the Essex Community Foundation, that was then spent on providing football training, dancing, and visits to Grange Waters outdoor activities centre for youngsters or teenagers, particularly in Chadwell, from Chadwell, because certainly in Chadwell, and I dare say in some other wards in Thurrock, there does seem to be rather a dearth of provision for that age group. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Oh, sorry.
So if there's no one else looking to come in, I think to try and summarise what we've discussed, then it feels like there are three broad areas, and I think what would be brilliant is if we could take this as the start of a conversation and a process. And Natalie, I guess I look to you in particular in terms of how we take this forward and make sure that we kind of capture this and move on with it. But I think the points that we've discussed are around funding, and in particular covering some of those basic areas of spend that local forums need to operate, around communication with some of the council departments and making sure that there's that really strong kind of two-ways communication in place, and then on help with outreach and how we really make sure that we enable the community forums to reach some of those groups more generally in our communities. And Natalie, I'll just look to you in terms of kind of next steps. Clearly, we've got the collaborative communities work. I guess what would be great is if we could circle back on those points, and I guess this committee, and I'd look to the members in the group, but I think it would be good to show that we can make some progress on that front over the next year.
Absolutely. I mean, the collaborative communities framework is a great way place to position that work. As Kim said, the TAF has an annual general meeting, so maybe if we use that opportunity to discuss the detail around those points and to take that forward, that'd be really welcome.
Thank you very much. So just to thank then Kim, Peter and Janet for attending tonight. I think it's been really invaluable for us to hear your kind of experiences and sort of feedback in terms of where that help is most useful. I think as we move on tonight, please feel free to sort of stay for the rest of the meeting. But if you want to tap out before we get into too much detail on finance updates and KPIs, then please do feel free to do that. So just say thank you very much again for attending this evening. And as Councillor Duffin said, thank you very much for all of the work that you do in our communities. It really is appreciated by all of us on this committee.
Councillor Garish, I would just like, I'm saying on behalf of the three of us, thanks for giving us the opportunity, because this is probably about the first time that we've ever been asked to attend an ONS meeting. So hopefully it's things to come along shortly. Okay, I'm gonna jump out because this is my fourth meeting today, so
Yeah.
I've had enough of looking at laptops. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks
I'll
very
bear
much.
that too. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you, Kim. Nice seeing you again.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. We'll move on then from item 5 to item 6. That links very nicely to that discussion. And we'll talk about the Collaborative Communities Framework. And Natalie, I think you're going to talk through this one on page 19.
Yes, I'm very happy to introduce this item. Thank you. So an earlier version of this work was shared with Corporate Overview and Scrutiny last year, and that work's developed over the last year in partnership with people and talking to different organisations. But it's been really propelled, I think, by the work that we carried out through COVID in partnership with the voluntary sector and setting up TCCA, which really, I think, inspired us to really get hold of this agenda and to take it forward and to put it down on paper and to see how we could take this forward within the council. So the framework very much puts residents at the heart of what we do. It's set around 3 different priorities, the first being equalities, and we've set out our 4 equality objectives: a fair access, improving cohesion and integration, improving resilience and workforce development. Then around empowerment, which is very much looking at our ability to work with communities, such as through the voluntary sector, community forums, PCAs, etc., and how we help those organisations to thrive and succeed. And then finally, through engagement, not just through consultation, but having those early conversations with communities. Very often, as I think the last item demonstrated, the things that our residents want are the same things as what council wants. And if we can galvanise our opportunity to work closer with residents, we're going to achieve more and better outcomes. So really the framework sets that ambition out. We are in the process of developing an action plan that does look partly at how we change the culture of how we work. As we've just touched on, sometimes officers are reticent to engage with the communities. There is a fear sometimes around doing that, but there's more to be gained. So if we can lead by example and show how good engagement provides better outcomes that help services and help residents, I think that's where we're best placed to get some of the traction to take this work forward. So some of that is about cultural change. Some of it is about how we set things up, sometimes that suit our processes, but are not always easy for communities to access. So we need to be more willing to flex how we do things and more supportive to help achieve the same outcomes that we want with communities. So there's a train of work around how we take that forward. We are very keen to take any comments from Overview and Scrutiny. We're particularly keen to explore what you feel will help to provide the greatest change in taking this forward, but also any views around the idea of taking forward the principles in some sort of pact or bond with residents in the future. This is a piece of work that's set over 4 years, so there are quick wins to be gained, but this is a long-term change programme that we hope will make a huge difference to how we work with Thurrock communities. Very happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Natalie. And I think, first of all, look, I feel like this is a really important piece of work, and I think as a council, if we crack this and do it right, then it will really set our services up well to work with our residents in a way that perhaps we haven't done in the past. I just want to explore a little bit the idea of the kind of the pact for Thurrock and how that would look. What's the kind of desired outcome for this? Is it almost kind of a statement of intent or a kind of a manifesto for the way that the council would work with our residents? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. So it could be either, really. I mean, some councils have set out manifestos of how they work with communities, and this, I think, is the beginning of it. The principles we've set out were very much carved during our experience of working with communities through COVID, but they could be really extended into some sort of pact where the council might be setting out commitments, but then we ask for commitments back as well. So there's more of a reciprocal arrangement with communities, and different councils have taken that forward in different ways. Some councils reward volunteering, for example, by having some sort of local reward scheme. We do have something in Thurrock called Time Bank, which we've explored some sort of reward scheme. So it's those sort of win-win arrangements where we can help to influence behaviour, influence how residents engage with us and support their communities. And we recognise that in different ways, depending on how we take this forward.
Thank you. Really interesting piece of work. The bit, I guess, I'll ask a bit of a question about it in more detail then, is around the point that you raised on engagement. And I think we had some really interesting feedback from our community forum colleagues on how they work and how we can communicate better with them. But clearly community forums are only one part of communicating with our communities. And actually, when we have, if you look at a ward by ward level, we're talking about thousands and thousands of residents. And I think it's really important that we have routes to contact a significant proportion of those through engagement processes, as well as kind of those kind of routes that will work through particular parts of the community. So I'm wondering what kind of thinking we're doing around how we not only kind of build out that engagement process, but also embed it into our services so that it just becomes a part of way of working across the council.
In terms of communication, there are so many different channels available to us now, whether it's written or social media, etc. Obviously, we work very closely with our communications team, which helps to deliver information from the council to those different networks. But in order to finesse really good engagement, we need a two-way process to enable that dialogue. So community forums are absolutely key to that. And they, on an area basis at least, are much wider than they appear. So it's not just the organisations attending meetings, but it is the networks they then have in with local networks. And that whole approach to different networks connecting with each other is really important. We also work very closely with the voluntary sector through CVS, and we've set up a partnership called Stronger Together, which is both the council and the voluntary sector, so that we're appearing less like one organisation communicating, but more as an organisation that's looking to facilitate discussion around key issues. So that there is that opportunity to explore ideas and to develop ideas at a very early stage to help nurture those policy discussions, and that's proved very effective. So there's some of the sort of ways in which we try to broaden that communication, not just not telling people, but inviting ideas and inviting comment, and hopefully that will inform more formal consultation as ideas develop, for that early communication where you can explore the same things that people want together. And sometimes grant funding is a very good way of doing that. So the Community Environmental Development Fund, for example, through that process, we invite applications from communities, which gives them a chance to set out their aspirations for their local area. And by then working with those communities, even if we can't fund those directly, we can help find other ways of funding those and making their aspirations for their neighbourhood come true. So there's lots of different layers to how we go about that. How we embed it, I think it's about the engagement with different directorates. Recently, for example, I've seen really great areas of engagement with highways, with waste, with many different areas, because the issues that people bring up and the way that we try to engage those services back into those discussions form a natural way of just picking up those issues. So the more we can prove to officers and residents that working together gets results, the more traction I think we'll get in taking that forward.
Thank you. Councillor Ralph.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to echo the Chair's comments on how important and vital this report is. If there's any time where community engagement is there for the grabbing, it's now. No, I'm so glad you brought up Stronger Together, Natalie. It's something that I've strongly been supporting and trying to get the word out how much Stronger Together has been in putting our community together during this crisis. And I think now, and say for the next year, we have a great opportunity where the communities are supporting each other. Right now, we're supporting the communities and the community is supporting us by listening to what we're asking them to do during this time. And as you know, I don't know if you knew that I was part of the team that set up Hardy Park. And you went from one point where it was just me and another guy to then having 3,500 people in a park that had all done their part in supporting us as a community. And it's wonderful to see. It's a wonderful achievement. But where I'd like to see more engagement with the council side of it, of our community, is an opportunity to get our information out there as well. So as rewards for the community to engaging with us, we could be offering things like, sort of not saying on the scale of all sit fair, but on that sort of events where we can have the recycling team out, we can have a bin truck parked there, we've given information about our waste collections and highways there with stuff about all the road repairs and all that sort of stuff, where we can give the information out at the same time offering sort of fun events as a reward to the community. And I just think, right now we've got a chance to reward our community and the community to reward us what we're doing. And just for the next year, I think it's a really key thing on the engagement with the community. And I love your report because, as you say, all the community stuff, it all fits right in there, and all the forums. And if there's a time right now, I'm glad the word COVID comes up a lot, because we can learn a lot from what we've just gone through for the next generations to come. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you so much. I mean, I really hope that we do return to community events and we have some fun in the future. It's been quite an atomised time over the last few months where we haven't been able to do that. But in the past, when our teams have gone out to community events and have engaged, they get some great ideas, great feedback. And I think when officers get that experience, it makes them feel much more empowered to go back into their services and to share those ideas and to tweak services in a way that can help to meet local people's needs. So thanks for your support.
Thanks so much. Does anyone else want to come in on this one? No, thank you. So I think the kind of the feedback from the committee there was very positive in terms of moving this forward. Clearly, how we work with our communities, how we collaborate, how we build better services through them, an absolutely crucial part of the council and how we move forward. So Natalie, I think hopefully we've given you some useful feedback in terms of next steps, and I think taken alongside those points that we discussed in the last item with community forums. I'm just really excited to see how this progresses, and clearly as this comes to an action plan as you highlighted, it'd be great to sort of keep that conversation going at ONS and to see those next steps.
Thank you very much. It's been really supportive comments, and we'll reflect those back in the final document. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move the items around a little bit now. I believe we've got Graham with us to introduce item 9 on connectivity and Wi-Fi improvements. So with the committee's permission, I'll just move that forward now, and then we'll return to the agenda as previously set out. Thank you. So, Graham, are you okay to introduce item 9?
Yes, sure. Yeah, thank you very much for that. My understanding was the paper was in response to some questions that came out of the last overview and scrutiny committee back in June in relation to digital infrastructure and connectivity. So I'll just go through a summary of the paper and then take any questions. Is that how you want me to go about it?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a number of things that we've been doing to address this space, which is about driving up the full fibre coverage across the region from a current about 8% full fibre to near on the 100% by the government before the government target of 2025. One of the key things that we've been doing is the local full fibre network programme. As a wider entity of Azela put in a bid to Department of Culture, Media and Sport for grant funding for rollout of full fibre, and we secured a grant of £4.4 million to roll out full fibre across the Azela area. Now that included about 130 kilometres of fibre across the region. Of that 130 kilometres, around about 78 or 60 kilometres within Thurrock, and 78 of the 130 sites within Thurrock. We're actually into delivery on that programme at the moment, and scheduled to complete the first 31 sites by the end of November, and the rest of the Thurrock sites by the end of January. What we've also done is we sought some additional funding, again as an Azela, to extend this programme. So this was through the government's Getting Building Fund, and we've just actually secured an additional £2.5 million. So that makes £7 million in total to roll out full fibre. So we're just at the moment sorting out the sites and where we want to roll those sites out to, because the key thing in this is about not so much the sites, but it's more about getting the fibre infrastructure out, extending those fibre spines into the areas where there isn't the full fibre at the moment. Tied in with this, what we're also doing is increasingly working closely with Superfast Essex programme to map the coverage, to align this and make sure that we get the best from the public money. So we focus that money to get the best value from it. There's also a new initiative from government, the Outside In programme, which we are engaged with. This is a programme from central government to actually drive full fibre to the most hard to reach locations, of which there are some within the Azela area, probably not so much within Thurrock. But one positive thing is that as Azela and Thurrock leading within Azela on this programme, we have an increased visibility within government, and increasingly we're able to actually influence and provide input in terms of where investments should be taking place. So that's very, very positive. One of the other things that we're doing is increasingly working with some of the community forums, some of the local community forums in Thurrock, because there are a number of those where they've got particularly poor broadband coverage, and they're keen working together to actually strive to improve that. So we're working with them to provide guidance and help in that. Another thing, a part of the LFFM programme, a key part of that, and a part that we're actually moving into more now, is the barrier busting and market engagement. This is about engaging with the market, because as great as the £7 billion investment that we have got in public money, that isn't going to on its own roll out fibre across the whole of the region. We need private sector investments, and the idea of this is actually to act as a catalyst. So to work with those private sector operators to actually encourage them to interconnect with this fibre, to make their business cases better for getting into those harder to reach areas, such that they will invest. And as a direct result of the LFFM programme, working together across the wider Azela, Openreach have just announced significant investment within Grays and Purfleet for full fibre. So that should mean within about 18 months' time, potentially 26,000 residents and businesses would have access to full fibre. And it is actually worth pointing out that our region here in South Essex has proportionally had significantly more investment over that period than the rest of the southeast region, and we would argue that it is because of this raised profile and these programs that we've been rolling out. The other thing that I think there was a question about, which was covered in the paper, was specifically around Wi-Fi. I think that was, is this going to improve Wi-Fi coverage? One of the things in terms of Wi-Fi is that the requirement and the business model around Wi-Fi is very much changing now. I mean, the demand for public space Wi-Fi by councils actually putting that out there in the streets is very much decreasing, and there isn't really the need and drive to do that because of the much greater 4G coverage that's available now, and also the prevalence of smartphones. I mean, most people do have a smartphone. Increasingly, they have inclusive 4G packages. So in terms of public open space, there isn't really that demand for public Wi-Fi, but where there is the demand for Wi-Fi is in inside. So inside spaces, because inside you tend to get less good 4G coverage. Also, people are going to be actually using that Wi-Fi much more prolonged. You'll be actually working, whereas when you're outside, you're normally just browsing or something. So you demand a lot higher performance, and also you might be concerned in terms of using up your data bundles, etc. So there is that demand within internal, but that Wi-Fi is normally provided by the organisation that is running that site. I mean, obviously, at council sites, we have got some public Wi-Fi, like within civic offices, we have got a public Wi-Fi. A key thing, though, that is common in all those cases is that the people actually really want, it's mobile data that's important, not Wi-Fi. Now, that's whether it be 4G, 5G, or Wi-Fi, but the common element behind all of that is full fibre. Sometimes people don't realise that, but even for 4G, 5G coverage, to get 4G, 5G coverage out into the more rural areas, you have to have full fibre to back all that 4G, 5G, and also for organisations to offer good quality Wi-Fi within their actually organisation, you need to have good full fibre into those buildings in order to be able to offer Wi-Fi. So what we're doing in terms of the extending the full fibre will lead to the improved Wi-Fi coverage. So essentially, I think that's probably all I want to say at the moment. I'll leave the bit on the timescales and just open up for any questions.
You're on mute again, Chair.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, see, I knew it would happen again. Thank you very much, Graham. That's really comprehensive, and I think covered certainly all of my questions that I was going to follow up on. Does anyone else want to come and ask a question? Councillor Ralph.
Yeah, you know I would. Yeah, thank you for this report. It answers a lot of questions that I did have. There was one that you have just touched on, and that is about the Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi. I'd be interested to know if the reduction of use of it is a corporate view or a public view. Was a consultation done on that to find that? I know personally there are places in Thurrock where I still can't even get a phone signal, and even being inside Lakeside, if it weren't for their Wi-Fi, I wouldn't be able to connect onto the internet. It's the same thing as, say, I go to Southend, using their own Wi-Fi system along the seafront, where phone signals are not very good, is a lifesaver. You can log on to your WhatsApp or whatever using that. So communication is still important. I just do wonder if, again, as I said, is it a corporate view or a customer view that the need for it has dropped?
I think it's a general market acceptance view. I don't think that we haven't done anything specifically within Thurrock or any analysis, but I think if you asked people generally in the industry, the sector, that is what they would say. Now, I totally accept that there are areas which have got poor mobile coverage, but probably where we sit now, it is not best use of public money to then invest in public Wi-Fi within those open spaces. It would be better helping the 4G, 5G operators to actually extend their 4G, 5G coverage. And as I say, that will be to a large extent. I mean, you see, the thing is, we are starting to engage with the mobile operators. Now, if we can show that we've actually got full fibre going to say, for example, some council buildings, some of our high-rise council buildings, where they can potentially put aerials on, they can then back all their 4G, 5G from there. They can make their business case much better for actually putting that there rather than somewhere else.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. I think what my concern would be that we don't want to see that, these packages that people get on their phones now come with a cost. And what we're ruling out is people who have a £15 a month contract where they have limited data. Also, you can use Wi-Fi for free. And you often do see these people sitting around outside the council buildings, outside Thameside Theatre and the libraries, using the free Wi-Fi. And I don't want to see it as that we're driving people to say you've got to have the £45 contract now to get the unlimited data, so you can use that. And I do think by restricting or reducing any free Wi-Fi is a negative.
Yeah, I don't think we're actually suggesting that restricting anything. And I know, well, I think a comment would be that the business model in charging for Wi-Fi has really gone now. I mean, hotels used to do it, didn't they? But I think increasingly that's gone. They can't justify it anymore. People won't pay, will they? They won't pay for highway. It's something that you expect. I mean, you go to a pub or whatever, they'll advertise the Wi-Fi, which is a sort of a selling point, but not that they're actually going to get direct money for it.
Yeah,
but I guess it's whether we should actually be investing more public money in terms of putting Wi-Fi masks outside, or put that money actually into getting the infrastructure in, the full fibre infrastructure.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Were there any other questions for Graham? No? Thanks very much, Graham. I think that certainly answers a lot of the questions that the committee had put previously. So yeah, thanks very much for coming to present that. And I think feel free to again drop out of the meeting rather than stay to the end now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. If you do have any other questions, just please let me know, and I'll be happy to answer them. But yes, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Cheers. Thank you very much. Okay. Thanks, everyone. We'll move on now then back to the agenda as advertised, and we'll go on to item 7, overview and scrutiny at Thurrock, a review. I think Lucy is going to take us through this one.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of give a bit of a background summary of some of the work that we've been doing over the past couple of years, and then I'll move on to what I'm kind of asking tonight and some of the recommendations that I'm putting forward, and then moving forward towards the implementation stage. So just a bit of a background. This kind of started a couple of years ago, I think out of backbenchers and councillors' wishes for the scrutiny function just to be reviewed, kind of updated, and just to see what our position was. And then there was a motion in October 2018 that kind of finalised that wish. Following on for that motion, we did quite a lot of work, and we presented before the committee. It seems like a lifetime ago now. I think it was probably January 2019. And we did quite a lot of research into what the current state of play was, so that we summarised that into quantitative and qualitative. And the quantitative data, we looked into all of the reports in ONS from 2014 to 2018, and some of the findings from that. And then in terms of qualitative, we looked at the Centre for Public Scrutiny's evaluation framework, and how we met that and some of the areas for improvement. I think the main outcome from that was looking kind of at the relationship between scrutiny and the executive, some of the training that was offered. There were lots of outcomes from that. And then moving on, we then went on to present before the committee. Well, the committee agreed actually to 3 different types of activities that we could undertake to kind of support that research and come up with some of our recommendations. So they were the Symposium was the first one, in which all overview and scrutiny members from all parties, backbenchers, chairs, were invited to attend the symposium that was chaired by the Centre for Public Scrutiny, Dr. Dave McKenna. And that was mainly kind of an overview to where we were, what we wanted to happen. The questions I think are outlined in the report. It was kind of, what are the improvements in Thurrock? What are we happy with? What are we not so happy with? And there were quite a few recommendations that came out of that, and quite a few good ideas actually that came out of that conversation that are included in the report. And we've broken them down into how impactful that scrutiny was and how to improve that impactfulness. And then in terms of policy development, how we can kind of improve scrutiny's role in that, having more of a kind of forward footing, if you like, in that regard, and also improving training and kind of some of the training that we offer. Yeah, and then we moved on to doing a few months ago the workshop with members of Cabinet. So I think that was with some of the members of yourselves of corporate ONS and some members of the executive, and the summary of that again is found in the report. But that was a really interesting chat about some of the draft recommendations that we'd come up with, getting their input really into the process and how they felt it was going. We also went through the draft executive scrutiny protocol, which is at Appendix 1, Appendix 1 of Appendix 1. And we went through it all point by point, and it was really good to kind of get their views on it, and their views are included throughout the report, including in the recommendations. We also did a lot of background research, and that took up quite a lot of time. Kind of we divided it into research from other local councils, like our neighbours, so Basildon, Southend, some of the London boroughs, and we also then looked at other unitary authorities, Medway, for example. We found that we're pretty much, I think, in line with what other councils are doing. We have quite a few more overview and scrutiny committees. I think the average we found was 3, whereas we have 6. But that was some of the discussions that were raised with the committee. And then, yeah, so following on from that, from all of that research, we're now presenting our findings. The recommendations, the overview, I think it's on page 47. And then in detail, we've gone into slightly more detail on page 64. And that's kind of what we're presenting tonight. And we'd really like to welcome any comments, any questions, because the next stage is that this goes to Cabinet, hopefully in December. And we'd like to include all ONS comments in that. Once it's gone to Cabinet, it will then start to be implemented. Some of the less difficult ones we can start to implement straight away. There are other, in the report, they're called Developmental Recommendations. And that's kind of more towards the changing culture around scrutiny. And there are going to be some longer term recommendations, that won't be as easy to implement, but we hope to get started next municipal year on some of them. I'm happy to take any questions, any comments. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. And just say thank you, first of all, for all the work that you've done on this. I know it's been about 2 years worth of research, various meetings, and quite a lot of kind of redrafting, setting out that research, sort of putting together conclusions and recommendations. So thank you to all of that work for you and Democratic Services. I think for me, I think this has been a piece of work that's been incredibly not just cross-party, but also cross-function of the authority. So both across overview and scrutiny, but also involving the executive to a fairly high degree to hopefully get something that is a good first step at how we take forward the scrutiny function at the council. I think, look, for one of these types of projects, I think it's always going to be a bit of a compromise across all of those areas to get something that is workable. I think certainly there is scope for me to go further in the future in a number of areas where I hope that the council does take things forward. But as a first step, I think this starts to get us to a place where there's a formalising of some of the processes and how executive and scrutiny works together, and how we make sure that we capture the essence of the scrutiny function, which is not to exercise decision-making authority, but it is to have constructive engagement with the executive and to make sure that we are working to improve the kind of the standard of policy that the council implements. And I think that's very much the spirit in which we've gone through this review. So as Lucy says, happy to take any kind of points on this before it goes through to Cabinet, and I think it's important that we then capture any of those comments and forward on. So I think Councillor Ralph, first of all.
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, this is a fantastic report, and I can see the work that's gone into it. Recently having the scrutiny training, it seems as if the model is now been implemented into that training, because it seemed to cover a lot of your points, from asking cabinet members to attend scrutiny. So that's something that we're trying to put in place now. Say the last health one, the cabinet member was invited, and the one before. One of the things that did come up was about reports that just need to be noted, and if really they should be sent out to us via email beforehand, and for us to make comments via email instead of them always coming in front of a scrutiny committee. So for a scrutiny committee, just to note a report, I think that we're not there just to do that, are we? It's that it needs to be more of that. So I think a lot of time in scrutiny committees are taken of just noting reports instead of putting through recommendations. So I think a lot of those reports could be moved to an email-based scrutiny instead of just putting the reports in front of us. But apart from that, yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Lucy, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thanks so much, Councillor Ralph. So that's one of the recommendations that's obviously included in the report. And we've listed that as a developmental recommendation just because it requires a larger change and a larger shift. Obviously, reports, if they do go through email, will be at the prerogative of the chair and the committee. And if the committee do feel like the report needs to come, to the actual meeting, then that's something that definitely can be considered, and it won't just be kind of, put on the back burner. But yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks very much. Councillor Haigh.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think obviously going back quite a long time, scrutiny can be quite political, has been in the past. I think it's less political now, really, but I just think it's a really important part of the democratic process of the council, really. I think when you are on the executive side, it can be seen as a kind of irritating, really, when scrutiny is challenging your decisions. Oliver will know that, and so will obviously Gerard. Others have been in that position, but it's really important to sort of maintain confidence, really, in our electorate that there's a democratic process going on. So I think it's really important, particularly the executive is engaged in scrutiny, particularly the cabinet members. I think they used to come to meetings much more frequently than they probably do now. And I think it's part of the process, really, to come and sort of face scrutiny when there's big decisions going on, to be able to have that proper dialogue with them. So I think the more we can try and make it, there's obviously a lot of time and money spent on scrutiny across the council, particularly officers and obviously members engaged as well. So it should be taken seriously, I think. And I'm not saying it isn't, but I think if we can give it, as you said, Oliver, a bit more teeth, really. It's important, really. I know, as I said earlier on, if you're on the executive side, you just want to get your policy decisions through, really. But it's important they're properly scrutinised, make sure they are robust and fully rounded and challenged correctly. And if you're confident in what you're putting forward as executive, you should be able to sort of come forward and obviously face off to other members, really, and the community. So I fully support how we make this more robust, if you like. And I think the actual report is really, really good. And I'm hoping that the Cabinet will take on board the recommendations, and we do get that kind of good, sort of two-way engagement, really. There's always going to be conflict between executive and the opposition, etc. That's part of democracy, isn't it, really? But I think the more you can make it part of the process and make it a positive process, really, the better, really. So I fully support the work that's been done. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Does anyone else want to come in on this item? No, I'm not seeing anyone else indicating. So are we happy to approve recommendations 1.1 and 1.2 for this to go on to Cabinet for consideration?
Agreed.
Yeah, thank
Great.
you very much. That is agreed. And I'm sure we will receive an update from Cabinet at their deliberations. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you again, Lucy, for all your work on this. If we go now to item number 8 and the financial update, I think Sean Clark is going to bring us some as ever happy numbers.
Thanks, Chair. I'll always do my best. This report is the third of this municipal year and provides update on the position last reported to this committee on the 8th of September. The report updates members on COVID-19 related funding and sets out the impact on the council's financial position, both for this year and over the medium term. Section 3.2 and 3.3 set out the additional government support that has been announced nationally, and Section 3.4 sets out what that means to Thurrock Council and Thurrock residents. The main headlines from that section include an additional 3.48 million of general support that brings the overall total to 14.24 million. Support towards losses in fees and charges. The council is still going through the claim process on that at the moment, but approximately 71% of losses should be covered. £100,000 towards enforcement and compliance. Further 1.2 million to support further measures in residential care settings and the provision of home care. Additional funding towards schools transport. 190,000 towards safety measures at the Thames side. And we're still waiting on the allocation for the cold weather fund. Just in late this afternoon, though, we've had an announcement on the COVID winter grant scheme. This is the scheme that was announced at the weekend by the government, and the council will receive £523,000 to cover the period from December through to March, and that is to support those most in need with items such as food, energy and water bills. And that would also cover where you've seen obviously quite a lot of publicity around free school meals as well. Regarding businesses, and in additional to the grants reported to the last meeting, the government has announced 4 new business support schemes since writing this report, 2 of which are applicable to Thurrock. The first is for those businesses that have been required to close during this lockdown. Depending on the business's rateable value, they will receive a grant of £1,334, £2,000 or £3,000 for this 4-week period. And the second is a discretionary scheme calculated at £20 per head of population, or 3.5 million. This can be used to support business activities, financial support to businesses who have been impacted but not required to close, or for businesses required to close but are not registered for business rates. Officers are still working through the detail, guidance is still coming through to us, but we expect the schemes to go live next week. Moving on to the general fund budget, the forecast before this latest lockdown period was an overspend of £2 million. That is using the full £4 million of surplus that was originally forecast for this year, and the first 3 tranches of the government grant. This latest grant announcement will cover the level of deficit, but we also expect the financial position to deteriorate further in this year. But to help mitigate some of this and to prepare for the next financial year, there has been a review of the capital programme to identify schemes that can be deferred or cancelled, and all non-essential vacant posts have been frozen. Whilst there has been an increase in residents receiving LCTS support, the full impact on employment from COVID-19 is still uncertain, whilst government support such as the now extended furlough scheme is in place. And finally, on taxation, a significant number of businesses in terms of business rates have been supported through business rate relief. That has been previously reported, but the longer term impact of that going into next year is not yet known. It is clear, though, that in both cases, the tax base will not be as high next year as would have been reasonably expected. The pandemic has also impacted on capital projects. Officers are doing all they can to mitigate the impact on timescales and specific costs in ensuring sites are COVID compliant. And then onto the HRA, impact has largely been limited to an increase in debt risk on rent collection. But again, the impact could be significant as employment protection schemes are phased out. That largely covers this year. So moving on to the medium-term financial strategy, we are now forecasting a £34 million budget gap over the next 3 years, 19 million of which is in next financial year. This is largely due to less council tax and business rates, higher level of growth required for social care, especially to ensure resilience in the market, a projected reduction in fees and charges to ongoing budgets, and a pause to the capital strategy that covers Thurrock Regeneration Limited and capital investments. I'll talk more about investments and borrowing in just a minute though, Chair. The challenge for next year is too big to meet with sustainable savings in the timescale we have. So we're examining a number of immediate short-term options. And they include a vacancy freeze of non-essential posts. We're looking for at least £4 million from that avenue. The use of capital receipts where we are able to capitalise expenditure, and the use of reserves. Other key elements are government directions that won't be known until mid to late December. These include the referendum limit for council tax, that is the maximum increase allowed, currently set at 2%, and any level of government support through the revenue support grant and any other specific grants. These have generally come out in the 10 days or so just before Christmas. That means we're only going to be able to take a draft budget to Cabinet in January and then onto this committee for consideration before decisions in February. Government have also announced that this will now only be a one-year settlement. That means that we will have no certainty for 2022-23 or beyond until, again, December of next year. Other actions that we're taking include a full asset review, a targeted transformation programme, and a review of the staffing budgets. Chair, although not specific in this report, I think it'd be useful for me to touch on investments and borrowing. In the main, all current investments are still working well and largely providing returns as expected. There are a couple of areas where pressures on providing the returns are now coming under pressure due to COVID-19. At this stage, I would emphasise that the Council's capital is secure, and these will be reported to the Shadow Investment Committee in due course. But I would like to advise members of the Council's borrowing position that has again been the subject of media interest in the last week or so. As regularly reported in the past, including within the various budget reports considered every February, the Council has focused the majority of its borrowing as short-term from other local authorities and other public bodies, and stated that this would be reviewed should there be any changes to the economy. The need to change slightly longer-term the need to change to slightly longer-term PWLB has now come and is due to two factors. Firstly, COVID pressures and uncertainty about future budget parameters has resulted in some local authorities not lending out as much money as they had previously. And secondly, every time there has been negative press coverage on the Council's borrowing investments, some bodies that have lent to Thurrock over a number of years have removed Thurrock from their lending list. Unofficially, I've received feedback that this has recognised that there has never been an issue with Thurrock Council meeting its obligations, that both lender and borrower have benefited from the transactions, but they, as a council, have not wanted to risk being the next ones in this next story. As such, the amount of funding available through that route has been reducing over time, and so we needed to swap that type of debt with PWLB debt. So this was not new borrowing, but it is refinancing. This will be further reported to the Standards and Audit Committee later this month, but as advance notification, the Council's gross borrowing was reported at 1.493 billion to the last meeting of Standards and Audit, and including the latest PWLB borrowing stands at 1.416 billion as at 31st of October. That is £77 million less than it was at the end of June. And now happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thanks very much, Sean, again for a comprehensive budget update. And thank you for sort of updating, in particular on those borrowing items. And I think clearly members will have seen extensive coverage of this in local media. Could you sort of thank you sort of for taking us through kind of the process by which we've got to where we are. I guess our residents will want to ask, in terms of that switch from switching debt into essentially refinancing through Public Works Loan Board. Does that come with additional costs in terms of servicing those loans?
Yes, there are additional costs, which is why we'd always stayed with other local authorities. So the switch to there is costing more money. Having said that, I would again emphasise that all of the investments, some of which that borrowing is funding, because other is for core capital expenditure, both previous and present, are still profitable. They are still providing positive returns, but the profit that we had been making is now being slightly diluted by increased borrowing costs.
Thank you very much, Sean. Now I've got a few questions, and then I'll open up to the wider committee. The first one I just want to start with is in terms of the end of year position for 2020-21. I think we reported last time that we had moved from around about 4 million surplus to 2 million deficit. And I think you indicated in your update that we're expecting that to deteriorate further. Do we have a view of how much further we expect that to go, and where we think that might land in terms of the deficit for in year?
So we did say 2 million, but again, the report sets out that was before the last announcement of the additional 3.5 million. So if it stayed at 2 million, quite perversely, we would actually be in a surplus position again this year because of the grant funding, and any surplus, should there be one, will be carried forward to help out future years. My belief is that the 2 million could quite easily get worse. That was all calculated before we knew about this 4-week shutdown. Is it going to end in December? Will there be any further impacts between now and the end of March? We've no idea. How bad will the winter be? And again, further pressures on social care. All of those are still unknowns for us at the moment. So I wouldn't expect it to get much better, but it wouldn't surprise me if it got slightly worse.
Thanks, Sean. And in terms of, I guess committee will want to sort of be reminded, in terms of meeting that deficit budget, is that a situation where that would just be a case of using our general reserves to cover any deficit position?
It would be, Chair. So we've got 11 million general fund balance. We've got a 6 million financial resilience reserve. We've got a £1.5 million social care reserve, and then we've got a general reserve of £5.5 million. The first thing we would target is the £5.5 million reserve, and we would try and keep the resilience reserves, until we absolutely had to use them should that position arise. And entering into the 11 million would be the absolute last resort.
Thanks very much. If we come on then to the 2021-22 budget, and I think that's at page 93 onwards. I guess first of all, we talked about a £34 million deficit to fill across the lifetime of the MTFS, and I think the report sort of states that about 12 million of that is from projected investments, both cash and capital investments. In terms of getting to that position, is this entirely for activity that's paused, and is that kind of a result of COVID, or is there a variety of factors here? So, for example, I'm thinking of TRL, where it feels like there are a number of factors slowing down work in that sort of area of activity that are not necessarily purely kind of COVID related.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Two aspects of the capital strategy. One was obviously investment activity, and our position at the moment is that we don't see how that can continue with any new investments going forward. There had been £1.8 million targets in each of the financial years, so we've had to reverse that out of this financial year because we're obviously not taking out any new investments of any size, and then out of future targets as well. TRL has been paused while we were considering governance. There will be a report going forward to General Services Committee looking at the governance and appointment of new directors. And there are also reports going through to Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee in the Cabinet on the various options for housing delivery, which will include updates on TRL. If we do move forward with TRL again, and every suggestion is that could well happen, then we would be able to put new targets back in place into the future 3 years.
Thanks very much. So I suppose residents will want us to sort of ask on this one. Clearly 12 million of 34 million is a big proportion of that budget gap to fill. And I guess our kind of investment strategy was kind of plan A in terms of how we would bring in additional funding to the council. Are we kind of short of the fact that we didn't have a kind of a great plan B to fall back on without that investment strategy delivering? And is there more that we could have been doing to ensure that there are other alternative sources of income for the council that we could have been leveraging instead?
I'll answer the second point first, if I may, Chair. I think we've been looking at avenues of additional income outside of investments across the board. What I will say is all of the council's fees and charges only bring in £8 million a year. And when you consider the whole range of that, to try and bring in new levels of income and so on, you're talking about drops in the ocean when you're considering the full amount that we're looking at. In terms of the first part of your question about Plan B had always been running alongside Plan A, if you like. It's now just had to be accelerated. So Councillor Hebb has been quite clear throughout, including in the report of the investment strategy in October 2017, that we were doing this to actually buy time to do a thorough review of all council services to actually determine what services we should be delivering and at what level we should be delivering them. That is now obviously being very much accelerated and not being able to be done over time. But that was always Plan B, but circumstances have brought us here now.
Thanks, Sean. So that's probably a good sort of segue into the next point. Again, carrying on from page 93 on how we address that funding gap. And I think the report sets out a number of areas in terms of how we meet that challenge. And I think you've said that the vacancy freeze brings about £4 million in. We use reserves to cover another 5.5 million or so, which gets us to about half of the 20 million or so gap that we need to cover for 2021-22. Beyond that, I guess we've highlighted the fact that we use capital receipts in a way that can be used to plug the revenue funding gap. We review assets, we look for fewer buildings, and we look at staffing budgets. Clearly, all of those have got a potential to have a relatively major impact. Do we have a sense yet in sort of how the kind of the financials sort of are apportioned out between those areas? We seem to have a sense of kind of where we are on vacancy freeze and use of reserves. In terms of those other elements, do we have kind of figures against them yet in terms of how much we'd look to save?
We do. I've penciled in £2 to £3 million worth of reserves, £4 to £5 million worth of capital receipt usage, £4 million worth of vacant posts. We've also been I'm making assumptions around council tax, but at the moment the referendum limit is still 2%. We're not going to know anything different from government until, well, hopefully December. But that's not even guaranteed at this stage. We are looking at other income sources that we can do. The government are allowing us to spread the what we call the collection fund deficit now over 3 years. So that's actually basically just deferring pressures further through the years as well. My working balance, I've still got a budget gap, which we're working to, but very much as well, we're looking towards the government announcements in hopefully December. And seeing what additional grants may be coming our way as well.
Thanks, Sean. Clearly, there's some way to go yet before we've got that gap closed. In terms of the impact, and we mentioned there staffing budgets, do we have an expectation that there will be a level of redundancies at play in the authority over the coming year, or is that something that we are not yet at the point of looking at?
We're still in very early stages. Just to re-emphasise, and it's something we picked up in the pre-meet, Chair, but for everybody else to be clear, the size of this gap and the speed that it's come with the COVID impact and the policy investment strategy, capital strategy, does not allow us to make what I would call permanent changes to our base budget, within the time allowed, and especially if anything involves staffing because of the consultation periods that we require. So next year, this is all about vacant posts. This is about, we're currently holding about 200 vacant posts at the moment. We're limiting employment or recruitment, sorry, as much as we possibly can. So there is no redundancy costs. These posts are already vacant, as I say, but it's how we manage that through. Going forward, there is likely to have to be a reduction in posts throughout the authority, but that is what we're effectively buying time for over the coming months by holding the vacant posts in the first instance. So at this stage, no redundancies planned.
Thanks, Sean. And then aware that I've gone through quite a few questions here. So last question from me, and then I'll open to other members to ask questions as well. But in terms of the stream to sort of review the buildings that we use in the borough and sort of see what services we can deliver from fewer buildings, how far advanced is that work? And are there any kind of particular facilities across the borough that we're looking at in terms of whether or not we still need them?
Again, early stages, Chair. We've been going through a review of basically pulling together a catalogue, if you like, for officers and members eventually to be able to work through, really challenging the use of those buildings and so on. But this is not just our operational buildings. We're looking at our operational, which are in the region of about 60 buildings, community assets of which there are about 50. And then we're looking at all of our other sites, which would be buildings which don't fall into either of those categories or areas of land. And we think there's about 180 of those at the moment that we're going through a challenge process on and seeing how we can make our use much more efficient. And this is really just going on with the 3R programme that Councillor Coxshall announced back in 2016 as well.
Thank you. I mean, I think this, just before I open up to the rest of the committee, I think certainly for myself, and I think probably for the committee as well, as these various projects move through, I think we'd be very interested in just seeing the detail reported here and have a chance to scrutinise those processes and make sure that we can really understand exactly what's being asked and to review those in detail. I think I'll open to other members now, and I think Councillor Duffin was first and then Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, thank you to Sean for the report, and thank you to him and his team for the work he does. I think, obviously, the fact that other councils changing their position is something that we need to be aware of as councillors. Something through the whole situation of reporting in the media that I found incredibly disappointing is the fact that there was councillors out there making false statements about meetings that claiming meetings never happened, where they just couldn't be bothered to turn up, and then going to the national media and claiming these secret things and everything's going on. What that's actually led to, and we found out tonight, is money is being taken away from the front line, money that could be going to helping the most vulnerable in our community. So while I'll always back scrutiny, and I've always been very loud within the council when making my point, going out there and actively making false statements and misleading information, claiming things never happened, has consequences. And councillors like Councillor John Kent deserve to be questioned on why he would go out and say things like that, claiming these meetings never happened when he was invited and didn't turn up has a consequence. And our residents are missing out because of actions like that. So it's really to call on this councillors to speak to our groups and understand there is consequences to things that happen. And it's really disappointing to hear that. Obviously, it's not the only thing that led to other councils potentially changing their mind, but when you have the leader of the opposition out there saying this is what happened and that's factually not true, that is incredibly disappointing. He was invited to those meetings, he chose not to turn up, which he's perfectly entitled to do, but then don't go out and claim the opposite. And that was something that's been disappointing, and our residents deserve better from all of us. We should be held to account for what we say, what we do, and that's only right. So no, it's to call on all of us to go back to our groups, say, look, by all means, you can hold people to account, you can argue things, but there is consequences when you get stuff wrong, and we all need to do better as councillors, myself included. It's all 49 of us. We're here to represent the residents of Thurrock. So while grandstanding and doing stuff, yeah, I'll hold my hands up. It's fun at times. You get a buzz out of it, but it has real life consequences. So no, it's just a call for us all to do better and go back and make sure we're holding ourselves to the highest standards, because there is a lot of money in people's lives and other things that are at risk.
Councillor Rice?
Yes, Chair. Sean, we're told the A13 is overspent. Depends who reports the figures. Some people say it's 35 million, others say it's 41 million. One would like to know what it really is, and also how will this be covered in the next financial year? Because this is when this project will come to an end, and obviously we will be left a shortfall, and how are we going to cover that, Sean?
Thank you, Councillor Rice. I mean, this is something that we've covered under the last 2 or 3 standards and audit committees and PTR as well. There is no impact on the council's budgets for this year or for the majority of next year. The reasons for that, we are still spending, the level of spend we have at the moment is still within the original budget envelope. We've obviously announced an overspend on the programme. So we're still within the original budget envelope, which is grant backed as well, through CELEP on that basis. We're still working through with the contractors and with our consultants about future costs. There are a number of challenges on the site that remain still from COVID coming through, and I've touched on that as a general issue for a number of projects, and certainly utilities down on the site as well. So we're working through that progress and challenging back. When it comes to paying for it, I can only give the response that I've given to PTR and standards and audit in the past, which is that the council is contracted with Kears to pay for the scheme. So what is actively happening from the project group is to try and seek additional funding from other grant schemes, from other private bodies, and so on, that may be able to contribute towards it. Any balance, which could be significant, or maybe zero, if that is a successful approach, would have to be met through prudential borrowing or through capital receipts as part of that capital review that I was talking about earlier.
And one further question, Sean. Obviously, there's controversy over the Stamford-Le Hope railway station. Another question really is, will that be completed, and will it be completed online so that we don't get into another overspend?
I'm not sure that anyone can give a definitive answer on that. The latest information I have, Councillor Rice, is that is expected to still come within the current agreed budget. I'm not being advised of any overspends on that project at this time.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Rao.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sean, for a great report. I was fearing worse, to be truthful, in predictions. Now, I'm happy to see that we're still predicting the 2 million, or it could be a little bit worse. Again, that's due to our resilience of our funding that we've come up with in the past and building our reserves. So that's great news there. I want to echo Councillor Duffin's comments regarding poor reporting, and I won't say lying, but bending the truth from other officers, other councillors. I'm very disappointed in some of the reports that I've seen where clearly people have very poor memories in not attending meetings. But once again, Sean, well done on the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Were there any other members wanting to come in on this item? No. Sean, one final question from me then. I think you referenced the work of the Investments Committee there. Would you be able to just give a quick update in terms of where we are with that committee? Clearly, this is something that this committee made a recommendation on some time ago. I don't think we've kind of had formally reported back to us kind of what the configuration of that committee is and how it's going to be taken forward. So it'd just be good just to have an update, just so that we're kind of fully aware of exactly how that will be formed.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I should have updated on that. So, Councillor Hebb, I'm trying to remember the date of the meeting, and sorry, it escapes me. Invited the various leaders of Thurrock Council's parties to a meeting to discuss the way ahead of setting up an investment committee. Councillors Gledhill, Hebb, Kent, Byrne and Massey attended. Councillor Allen was invited. There was some discussion. We presented the council's investment position at that meeting, and also looked at ideas for governance around there, most of which was largely supported as a direction of travel. We then looked at the timescales to make the constitutional changes, terms of reference, etc., and what political makeup there would need to be in terms of representation on the committee. It was agreed by those present that we would not rush into that, but that we could act. It could act with that membership as a shadow committee, whilst we took our time, ensuring that the terms of reference were correct and so on. So over the coming months, that'll act in that basis. I spoke to Councillor Hebb, what day is it today? Tuesday, just last night. And we were setting out a provisional date there to invite members back to another meeting of that in early December, once hopefully lockdown is complete. And at the meeting originally, it was also talked about being able to then go through things like the capital strategy report, which includes all of our borrowing levels and capital programme, etc. as well, to at least have that shadow investment committee set of views on those papers and those levels as well. So it's certainly work in progress. There has been a meeting. Councillor Hebb is about to send an invite for another meeting, but there was an agreement, as I say, to work under a shadow basis to be able to make it move a little quicker at this time. Thanks, Sean. Really encouraging to hear the progress on that one, and be good to hear sort of as we go through the next sort of few months, sort of where we get to on final configuration for that. Unless anyone else wants to ask a question, I think we've commented and asked questions of where we are, and we look forward, I think, to the next budget update in January. Okay, thank you very much, Sean, again. Okay, if we go then to item 10, the Q2 performance update report on page 105, and I think Karen is going to take us through this one.
Thank you, Chair. So as you said, this is the Q2 performance report, which takes us to the end of September 2020. You'll see from the report that almost 77% of indicators have achieved their targets, so are green. This includes 3 that we reported as being red and off target in Q1. Theme of the report, as with Q1, is the impact of COVID. but we have seen some positive changes as services have been able to reopen libraries, as an example, in terms of some of the services that they've been able to provide. Obviously, we may again see an adverse impact in Q3, and we'll continue to monitor that. As usual in the report, any of the indicators that have failed to achieve their target, we've set out the reasons behind that. And as this committee recommended previously, the route to green, to show how hopefully we will improve the direction of travel and hit target over time. I'm happy to take any questions on any of the detail, and if I'm not able to answer any of those specifically about some of the services, happy to pick that up outside of the meeting. But a positive report, hopefully, and particularly compared to Q1 and the current climate. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Karen. I don't have too many questions on this tonight, but if I just start on page 106 and paragraph 3.1 and the performance against target summary, I think we're talking about 30 targets there. How does that compare to how many KPIs we'd normally be reporting at Q2? My sense was it felt a little lighter than usual. I'm just wondering if COVID's had any impact on the number of those KPIs that we can report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There are a number of KPIs. I'm trying to find the paragraph in the report towards the end where we're not currently able to report those. There's 7 indicators that we're not currently reporting. So yes, slightly down on the usual number, largely due to the impact of COVID. And obviously every year we do review the targets, so some new indicators are added and some removed. But yes, slightly down on what we would usually report at this time of year due to that reason.
Thanks. I feel like a lot of the in focus indicators we've talked about at quite a lot of length over previous performance sessions. Page 113, though, the general tenant satisfaction with services provided by housing. This is an indicator that feels like it's jumped in and out of good and poor performance over the last sort of year or so. And as such, when I kind of read the route to green kind of commentary, it still feels like there's a lot of work being done to understand areas for improvement rather than kind of setting out a solid improvement plan and specific actions. So I wonder if there's just more there in terms of what's being done in that service, and perhaps one for us to follow up on in terms of understanding actually what those concrete next steps are.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'd agree with that, and you can obviously see from the green red in terms of how it's reported that it is an indicator that does change. I know the service have seen improvements in months where there has been increased engagement activity and increased information provided to tenants. I think, as you said, Chair, I think the service is still trying to understand the reasons behind that and what is impacting on the overall satisfaction levels. There are a number of detailed measures and questions that tenants are also asked, and the service have tried to expand the breadth of the consultation and engagement so that more tenants are able to participate in that. So it's absolutely an ongoing piece of work for the service, and I know it's something that's reported in more detail to Housing Overview and Scrutiny, but I think it's a fair summary, and I think the service recognise that and are continuing to do work to get underneath those indicators and work with residents to understand their feedback and the reasons behind that fluctuation.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I mean, I think from my point of view, when we get to reviewing Q3, I guess what ideally we want to see kind of back. But failing that, kind of a very clear action plan in terms of what the service is going to deliver and when to kind of to meet that expectation. And I think really that's what we should be expecting over coming months. Thanks very much. Does anyone else want to comment on the KPI report?
I have to touch on investment. No, apprenticeships. Obviously, it's there. I understand why it was missed. I have no issue with that. I understand there's a lot going on, and to be fair, I've had new starters starting the business I work in, and are they getting full value by working remotely and everything else? So it's something I have full confidence that it'll be addressed over the next year, next quarter, or whenever normality, if we can even call it normality, ever returns. But no, I have to touch on it. I've touched on it on every KPI meeting since I was elected, so it'd be wrong to let it go. But no, I understand that one will be addressed.
I think that's reasonable. Only one person off, I think, Karen, won't we?
Yeah, and I think hopefully in quarter three we'll be able to provide an update on how the virtual event went and the outcomes from that. So hopefully we'll have a positive update in the next report as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to hear. Councillor Ralph?
Oh yeah, it's just when we're talking about the homeless, and it's sort of a little bit offbeat of what we're talking about specifically on the report. First of all, the report's brilliant. It's much more healthier than what the last report was. It's more encouraging, as we know what COVID has done. It was just regarding the landlords and the tenants when it comes to homelessness. And I understand that as a council, we don't class anybody homeless until the day they're made homeless by a landlord. So we have a situation where someone will notify a local councillor or the council their landlord's selling the property and they're going to be made homeless on a certain date. But we don't record them as being homeless, and we don't help them or aid them into looking for new property until the day they become homeless. I just wonder if there's something we could do in looking into that to offer more help before that. I know we say we negotiate with landlords and all that, but when it's clear that they have a date they're going to be made homeless on, that we can start looking and negotiating, maybe looking at like what we can offer in paying rent up front or something like that for them. I made a right muck up of putting that across, by the way. It sounded good in my head, but when I come out of it, it got jumbled.
Not at all,
very clear, Councillor.
And it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think obviously we've got some numbers in the report, and we are aware when people are at risk, and as you said, I think we do what we can to start those negotiations and support tenants wherever we possibly can. I think it's probably something for me to take away and try and provide a bit more detail in the next report from the service, if that's okay with you, Councillor, and with the Chair. I think obviously we've got a little bit of information in the report in terms of what we do try to do, but I can certainly feed that back to the service.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks very much, Karen. Does anyone else want to come into this report? No, I can't see anyone indicating, so I think I'm happy that we have commented as required on this item. And I think we can move on then to item 11, which is the work programme. Were there any comments from members on the work programme or anything additional that we wanted to see? I almost said Councillor Clark there, but Sean.
Chair, yeah, just following on from what I was talking about with the budget setting for next year. We've got corporate ONS on the 12th of January at the moment, but Cabinet, I can't take a budget report to Cabinet in December because we will not have the government announcements around council tax or grant. So I'm going to have to take that to Cabinet in January, which is the 13th of January. So last year, we were in a similar position last year or earlier this calendar year, and you ended up agreeing to an extraordinary meeting just to look at the budget papers. So I'm going to have to ask if you would be willing to do that again, or whether we just move the whole of the 12th of January meeting back a week, 2 weeks, a date that we can agree is convenient. but the Cabinet will consider the report on the 13th of January, and then I'd obviously need time to turn around what their recommendations are to inform you of that.
Thanks, Sean. I'll look to members here, but my take on this one, since the 12th of January meeting is largely budget items, it seems most sensible, if you're okay with us just taking the initiative with Lucy to find a date for that meeting that works in terms of the council's finance processes, and we'll try and just make sure as many of us as members can make that. Thanks, councillors. I think that's agreed. Lucy, if we can just pick up, then we'll try and get some dates in early and just make sure that we find something that we can all attend.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much. If there aren't any other comments, then no. Thank you very much to everyone that was attending the meeting this evening, and I will therefore call the meeting to a close. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, members. Good night.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.